So, Ferrari sat Charles Leclerc down at some point before the Monaco Grand Prix weekend and said, "We love you. We want you forever. Sign this slave contract." And Charles Leclerc, a man who has been with this team since he was a teenager in their driver academy, been through every "it's so over" moment and the "we are so back," picked up the pen and signed it, keeping him stuck at Maranello into the 2030s. A few days later, he crashed in qualifying, and then he crashed out of the race, at home in Monaco, in front of his family, his friends, and presumably every single person who has ever met him in his life. As they say, the lights were just too bright. 3 of his 4 brakes stopped working under the safety car, and the car drove him like a passenger straight into the Anthony No Guest barrier at the final corner, bringing out a red flag, ending his race, and completing what is genuinely one of the more hilarious sequences of events this sport has produced in recent memory. Signed the contract on Wednesday, crashed in qualifying on Saturday, crashed out of the race on Sunday. But here's the thing about Charles Leclerc in 2026. Monaco was not even the worst part. Monaco was just the part that hurt the most. The actual worst part is the full picture, which involves a season that started with genuine promise and has progressively become something between a technical horror show and a study in how one driver can watch his own teammate win in the same car while standing next to the garage wondering what exactly is going wrong. Charles Leclerc is 28 years old, he has been at Ferrari for 8 seasons, and right now, Lewis Hamilton, who left the team he spent over a decade at to come race him, is sitting 40 points ahead of him in the championship, in the same team, in the same car. To understand how we got here, you need to go back to the start of 2026, because the season did not begin as a disaster, and that is actually what makes it worse. Pre-season testing was genuinely encouraging for Ferrari. The SF26 looked competitive in Bahrain across both test weeks, Leclerc was quick, and with the new regulation shuffling the entire grid, there was a real sense that this could be the year Ferrari and Leclerc finally made good on everything they had been building toward. He himself had said at the end of a completely winless 2025 that 2026 was now or never. Bring on Australia, round 1. Ferrari picking up points, the car competitive if not quite at Mercedes level, and nobody was panicking about anything. Charles looked comfortable, the car felt decent, everything was pointing in the right direction. One race in, the now or never energy felt justified. China was when the first crack happened. Hamilton and Leclerc nearly made contact on track, a moment that made Fred Vasseur age visibly in real time and prompted him to immediately inform both drivers that he trusted them to race cleanly, which is the team principal equivalent of sending a very pointed email. In an F1 car, confidence at breaking points is everything. Lose it, even slightly, and it changes how you drive, how you qualify, how you manage a race. Charles Leclerc started losing it in China, and the season basically never gave it back to him. Japan made things worse in a different way. The 2026 power unit regulations have been a frustration for several drivers throughout the year, with the complex energy deployment systems requiring precision on a qualifying lap that leaves very little margin for error. Leclerc made a mistake during his qualifying run at Suzuka that disrupted his power unit's energy deployment and cost him significant lap time in a session where the margins are tiny and every 10th matters enormously. He vented his frustration at the new regulations afterwards, which is the kind of thing drivers say when the car has done something they didn't expect and they're trying to be diplomatic about it. He still finished the race P3, actually his best result since Australia, but the qualifying error left a mark on a weekend that could have been better, and the pattern of Leclerc leaving points on the table through small margins and bad timing was starting to take shape. Miami was P8, and that's about all there is to say about Miami. The car wasn't working the way it should, the feeling wasn't there, and Leclerc crossed the line in 8th place, looking like a man who had just had a long conversation with a problem he couldn't identify. Hamilton finished higher. The gap between them in the standings was growing in a direction that was not ideal for Leclerc's state of mind, and the press conferences were becoming increasingly full of words like difficult and not ideal, and we need to understand, which are the phrases drivers reach for when they know it's so over. And then came Canada. Charles Leclerc described the Canadian Grand Prix as the most difficult weekend of my Formula 1 career.
I finished the race now, and I can definitely say it's the most difficult weekend of my Formula 1 career so far.
That is a man with 8 years in Formula 1 saying that a specific weekend was the hardest thing he had experienced in his entire professional life. He had zero feeling with the tires from the very first lap of Friday practice to the very last lap of the race.
I just felt like I'm going to put it into the wall in every single corner I do, just because the tires were completely out of the window.
He spent the final 15 laps of the Grand Prix driving a second and a half off the pace, specifically to avoid crashing into something, and even then had moments he described as too close for comfort. He qualified 8th. He finished 4th, which he immediately clarified was more out of luck than a reward out of my hard work and incredible job, because Russell retired and McLaren made one of the strategic errors of the season and Leclerc inherited the position rather than earning it. And while all this was happening in Leclerc's side of the garage, Lewis Hamilton was in the other side of the garage having the best weekend in a Ferrari since he arrived. Hamilton had at some point during the season made a very specific and quite unusual decision. He stopped using the Ferrari simulator, just decided it didn't correlate well enough to the real car and that he would rather work directly off data from the track. And at Canada, this approach produced a setup direction that nobody at Ferrari had apparently tried before, which transformed the car from his very first lap of practice, and Hamilton went on to finish second, 34 seconds ahead of his teammate in the race, and looked completely and utterly at home. After the race, Leclerc said Hamilton was absolutely incredible, and that it was a good thing to have such a benchmark in the other garage, which is very generous and very professional.
Only positive of a weekend like this is that I've got Lewis in the same car, and I can look at what he did this weekend and try to get answers on why I was just struggling so much.
It also sounds exactly like what you say when you're trying extremely hard to be positive about something that is not making you feel positive at all. Then came Monaco, and you already know what happened in Monaco. But the full sequence of events deserves a proper walkthrough because individually each moment is painful, and together they form something that borders on artistic in its cruelty. Leclerc had been dealing with brake issues since Canada. He confirmed this after the Monaco race, that the problem had been present across multiple weekends. On Wednesday before Monaco, Ferrari announced his contract extension. The Tifosi celebrated, Charles was happy, the timing felt perfect. Sign the deal, then win at home, ride the wave into the European season. Qualifying on Saturday, Leclerc is fastest in Q1. The car is clearly there. Ferrari have something at Monaco and everyone can see it. He gets through Q1, Q2, makes it to Q3, heads out on his flying lap, arrives at the final corner, and hits the wall. Apparently, it's the kind of thing that happens in Monaco qualifying because Monaco qualifying is specifically designed to take years off your life. Race day. Verstappen retires on the opening lap with a power unit issue. Some light karma for how many times Red Bull reliability has ruined other people's days.
Yeah, nice. Completely. Guys, what the man?
And Leclerc moves into third behind Antonelli and Hamilton. Third place at home, few laps to go, the crowd going completely wild because Monaco crowds are always completely wild. And then Lance Stroll crashes into the Antonino-Guest barrier and the safety car comes out. Under the neutralized conditions, 3 of Leclerc's 4 brakes stop working. He tries every switch and button and procedure available to him in the cockpit to fix it, nothing. The car is still moving, the restart is coming, and Charles Leclerc is sitting in a Formula 1 car with 1 working brake at the most demanding braking point on the calendar, which is approximately the worst situation you can be in on a street circuit in Monaco. The restart begins, he arrives at the Antonino-Guest, the brake fails completely. He goes straight into the same wall that got Stroll, red flag, race over. You can't reasonably blame a driver for driving into a wall when his brakes have stopped working. What you can do, and what Ferrari immediately started doing, is investigate what happened and try to understand why a brake problem that had been present since Canada was still present at Monaco, and was still present in a way that cost him his home race. Barcelona then arrived the following weekend, and Charles Leclerc, who had just had a particularly rough 2 weeks, even by his own extensive standards of rough weeks, decided to make a change. He switched brake disc suppliers, moving from Brembo to Carbon Industry, the same supplier Hamilton had switched to back at the Japanese Grand Prix, a switch that Hamilton had specifically credited with improving his feel and confidence at the braking points. Logical move. Copy what is working. Get the feeling back. Go to Barcelona and turn it all around. On his very first run in Q3 qualifying, Leclerc tried to carry extra speed through turn 4, took a slightly shallower line than his previous lap, got onto the dirty side of the track on the exit, felt the rear snap away from him, overcorrected, and went through the gravel. Unlike Monaco, this one was entirely on him. He was trying something aggressive and it didn't work, and he ended up in the wall, and he was not going to blame the car for that. Hamilton in the same car qualified second, was so close to taking pole away from Russell, and had his best qualifying performance of the year. The race was going reasonably well. Leclerc made up 3 places in the first lap, was working through the field from 10th, had decent pace, until the virtual safety car came out when Alonso stopped on track, and the timing of his pit stop left him stuck behind Verstappen rather than ahead of him, which cost him positions he had worked very hard to earn. And then, with 5 laps remaining, the power steering failed, then the throttle, then the brakes. Second consecutive DNF. 2 weekends in a row at Monaco and Barcelona, the 2 most glamorous races on the European calendar, and Charles Leclerc didn't couldn't finish either of them, a Lance Stroll-worthy feat. Hamilton won Barcelona, Ferrari's first victory of the 2026 season, after 7 races without one, and it went to Lewis Hamilton. But the optics of the whole situation are still something, aren't they? The man who has been at Ferrari for 8 years, who came through their academy, who has 27 pole positions with this team, who signed a contract extension this very month, standing in the Barcelona garage, watching his new teammate take the team's first win of the year in the car he couldn't finish the race in. The last time Ferrari won a race before Barcelona was Carlos Sainz at the Mexico Grand Prix in October 2024, a week after Leclerc himself won the United States Grand Prix, which means the streak of races without a Leclerc win has been running ever since. 33 races. 2026 is not the first time Charles Leclerc and bad fortune have been formally introduced. This is actually an ongoing relationship, a long-term thing. Ferrari and Leclerc have been doing this specific dance since 2019, and the steps are always slightly different, but the music is always the same. In his first season at Ferrari, he won Spa and Monza back-to-back, announced himself to the world as the next great champion, had everyone absolutely convinced, and then spent the rest of the year watching the car become inconsistent and the results dry up. The years 2020 and 2021 were spent in Ferrari's worst cars in a generation, cars that had no business competing at the front, and Leclerc still managed to extract performances from them. He was dragging things to the top 10 that probably deserved the bottom 5. Then 2022, and Ferrari finally had the fastest car. Not faster than Red Bull by the end, but in the first part of the season, Leclerc was leading the championship. He won Bahrain, he won Australia, he was fast and confident, and the momentum felt different to anything Ferrari had built in years. And then the car started breaking, and the strategy started misfiring, and Leclerc specifically lost a win at Barcelona when the car failed while he was leading, and another at Baku when the engine gave out while he was leading, and by the end of the year, Verstappen had won the championship by so much it had stopped being a competition about 8 races from the end. Leclerc finished second in the driver's standings. Ferrari finished second in the constructors. On paper, fine results. In reality, a season that should have been a championship campaign and wasn't because the machinery kept finding new ways to let him down. 2023 was a slog. 2024 was better. Ferrari were competitive again. Leclerc had some of the best individual performance of his career. And then in Monaco, his home race, the race he had come so heartbreakingly close to winning multiple times before, he finally won. The weekend was perfect. Pole, race win, crowd, home, everything. It was the kind of moment that makes the difficult years make sense. The kind of win that you look back at and think, right, that's why you stay. That's what it was all for. And then 2025 was winless for Ferrari as a whole. They slumped to 4th in the constructors, and Leclerc came into 2026 saying it was now or never. So here we are, now or never arrived. The car is quick enough to win. Barcelona proved that beyond any reasonable argument. The team is second in the constructor standings. The new regulations treated Ferrari significantly better than some of their rivals. Everything Leclerc asked for, everything he stayed for, everything the contract extension was predicated on is more or less there. And he has 2 DNFs in a row, a championship deficit to his own teammate, and a brake problem that followed him from Canada to Monaco to a qualifying wall in Barcelona before he finally changed suppliers. The universe looked at Charles Leclerc's best case scenario for 2026 and flipped it on its head. Leclerc confirmed in Monaco Media Day that he had received offers before signing and simply said Ferrari was always the choice.
For me, Ferrari was always the choice.
Which is genuinely touching, and also slightly heartbreaking in the context of everything that followed in those same 2 weeks. There are 16 races left in 2026. The gap between what the car can do and what Leclerc's season has produced is not a talent gap, it's a circumstance gap. It's the gap between what should have happened and what did, and Charles Leclerc is more familiar with that particular gap than any driver in Formula 1 history probably should be. It's up to him to find this confidence with this car, to put everything together and hopefully win clean weekends. The car can win. Charles Leclerc can drive. What he needs is a weekend where nothing breaks. Given what 2026 has served him so far, that sounds like a reasonable request. Given what 2026 has served him so far, it also sounds like a lot to ask. Being a Charles Leclerc fan in 2026 is a very specific experience. You go into each weekend knowing the car can win, knowing your driver is one of the most talented on the grid, knowing that the infrastructure and the team and the contract and the commitment are all there. And then you watch qualifying and something snaps. Or you watch the race and 3 of the 4 brakes stop working under a safety car. Or you watch the closing laps and the power steering disappears. Charles Leclerc just needs the universe to stop being so funny, and the Tifosi, bless them, need a weekend where they can celebrate something that doesn't immediately get taken away. They signed up for a love story between a Monegasque kid and the most famous team in motorsport. What they got instead is a 6-episode season of a show where every episode ends on a cliffhanger, and none of those cliffhangers resolve.